This program was brought to you by Koller Institute of Venture at Tel Aviv University.
Perfect. So, as Yesha very kindly mentioned, I look at what governments, national, regional, city, etc., do to support venture ecosystems. So I'm going to give a very brief talk this morning about this important topic. So starting with, I wanted to give some context for why it is, as Yesha said, why this is such an important area. And I think that this quote, which I also use in my article and I like quite a lot, really underscores why governments have a role in supporting innovation and venture. And this is in the World Fair in 1939, television was debuted. And as our media does today, media said what they think of television as a new invention. And so the New York Times editorial said, and I quote, "Television will never be a serious competitor for radio because people must sit and keep their eyes glued on a screen. The average American family hasn't time for it." And if we think about the amount of time that we spent on screens today, it's incredible that in 1939, this was no way could people sit and stare at a screen. I think this would have been maybe a better life than we have now, actually, with all the time we spend on screens. But it's hard. The point of this is that it's hard to predict which innovations are going to catch, of course. And we all know this intuitively. But I think that this very influential newspaper getting it so wrong is a really great way of underscoring why governments have to get involved, because the risk tolerance of investing in technologies that may or may not take off is, of course, needs to be patient, have deep pockets, etc. Government sort of things. So again, policymakers have a role in supporting this. This is the idea. I'm going to also talk about the debate around whether or not governments should, how deep they should go in supporting or directing innovation. Another quote, which is featured as well on the Koller Institute of Venture website, research and positions given by a gentleman named Ken Dill in the US, who said that the US now needs a SAR for innovation. And he said the reason that governments need to support innovation is similar to the logic that I've just outlined, that corporations oftentimes don't have and he says that research that's considered too basic, too blue sky, too expensive, or too diffusible, too much of a public good, simply isn't research that's going to be done by the private sector. Here's the role of the government. So what does this mean? So we think, as Ellie mentioned, of radar, we think of Silicon Valley. Many say today, though, that Silicon Valley was a construct of many different factors. One of those factors perhaps being the role of the government, but that it was the product of this unique confluence of factors coming together over time. Others say that the role of the government with the investment in radar, the public-private partnership at Stanford, UC Berkeley, etc., was essential. So this is a sort of roaring debate in some of academia. I'd be curious if you could raise your hands for those who think that Silicon Valley is, let's say, primarily a product of government investment and government support. Government enablement. Versus those, and raise your hands for Silicon Valley as a product of a unique set of circumstances. Okay, so overwhelmingly private circumstances, it just happened, that it was this unique confluence of factors. So then why are we talking about the government needing to invest? Well, if we think about the context of the world that we live in today, there's huge constraints on government pocketbooks, even more so than times when, in times when everything is good. So there's a decrease in the money that's spent on R&D. This chart shows the relatively steep decline, in particular on federal funding on R&D in the US. So if there is a case for Stanford and research that's come out of places like Silicon Valley, research that's come out of government investments in irrigation in Israel being one of the ways of creating deep innovation, We could argue that this decline in R&D from the largest spender on R&D globally, the US, that this would present a problem for deep innovation, because the very pocketbooks that are meant to be patient enough and big enough and perhaps have the least interest in the commercial output are maybe not investing what they once were. Interestingly, especially for those with an interest or a background on China's role in this space, China is now on par or perhaps even eclipsing the spending on R&D that the US has been investing, that was clearly the leader. You notice that Israel, on an absolute basis, is high, is 18, which I think is fitting. The European Union, just to underscore the importance that many countries and regional governments see in investing in government policy to support innovation. The European Union, I've actually spoken at different European Union conferences, and even European Union policymakers haven't heard of this. Could you raise your hand if you've heard of the European Union's slogan as the Innovation Union? Oh, okay, that's pretty good, actually. Okay, great. So by 2020, the European Union wants each of the member states to have a total R&D expenditure across public and private spending of 3%. When this goal was created in 2002, there was around 1.9% of GDP. So a really massive goal, actually, across a large group of countries that are interested more and more in being more innovative, in deep innovation, as we say. So I focused on R&D, and I want to make clear in something that my article in the publication that you'll receive at 5 o'clock today highlights. R&D is not the only way. Actually, my favorite means of government support of the venture ecosystem has come out of Israel. As those who have read The Startup Nation and are otherwise interested, of course, Yozma is a huge phenomenon for those of us in the venture policy circles, successful in creating the Israeli venture capital ecosystem. So I outline in my article 8 categories of public support of venture. So funding, which would include R&D, it also includes things like Yozma, and different ways of the government giving money to private sector actors to innovate. Taxation, tax breaks, low tax rates, either zero or low tax rates, regulatory incentives, regulatory innovations, regulation, including, if we think of the limited partnership structure and other way and limited liability structures, in a way to incentivize entrepreneurship and innovation, changing bankruptcy laws so that there isn't a punitive aspect to a business closing down, etc. Supporting clusters, networks, and institutes, governments investing, of course, in places. I'm based in London, in Tech City, Silicon Roundabout, which has been, and only started in 2010. Tech City in London has been, I would say, on all accounts, an overwhelming success in many respects in creating a cluster, which, and it was a government-led effort, partnered with many large multinational companies. 4 other things I'll just very quickly talk through, and then I want to get on to our next speaker, who has a lot more to say on deep innovation. So attracting talent and investment, entrepreneur visas, bringing talent from the world in. When places like Germany say, let's get rid of our scientists, seeing that as an opportunity for a brain bank and trying to bring the best and brightest in, something that Taiwan did very effectively beginning in the late 70s. Technology infrastructure and government procurement, using government pocketbooks literally to buy interesting innovations. Stock market access, creating stock markets, allowing your local companies to list on foreign exchanges. So Israel has been a leader in allowing Israeli companies to list on NASDAQ, for example. Finally, and the 8th category, education and training. Vietnam, interestingly, has launched a program where 3rd and 4th graders are being taught C++. So interesting that there's this sort of leapfrogging that sometimes you see emerging, truly emerging markets that are moving ahead of a lot of maybe Western countries and giving their students the long-run tools to compete in innovation and technology fields in the future. So these are my 8 categories, again, which you'll see in the article, and I'm happy to talk about throughout the day. Just to close, so these are the 8 categories. There's debate, as you said. Do you think the Silicon Valley is the product of a unique confluence of factors? So there's ideas that government support in some respects works, and it's a good thing, and we want to see it happen, but it's not always and not often actually easy for governments and for policymakers to get it right. For those that research clusters and innovations, you know that just because you build it, they don't necessarily come. So getting the policies right. So I've just outlined a few things I just want to talk through quickly. So how do policymakers get it right? They need to have a long time horizon, maintain a sufficient risk appetite. In some of the research I've done in East Asia, governments will invest and then say, actually, we want to see a return within 3 years, but we've made an investment in a venture capital program. So those that are VC, people would say, well, 3 years and a VC return, it doesn't necessarily fit. Build on local competitive advantages. Don't just try to replicate Silicon Valley. Partner with private sector. So Bell Labs, Stanford being great examples of that. Don't over-engineer support. Don't crowd out private investment. Tricky, the next one, which is funding private activities that are unlikely to be self-sustaining or commercially viable. So on one hand, the government needs to undertake the risk that the private sector isn't willing to, but the government also doesn't want to be drawn in to invest in things that will never be, or the private sector wouldn't be willing at all to invest in. It's a tricky balance. And finally, conceding tax revenue unnecessarily. There's a trend in decreasing tax rates to attract investment, to attract corporate activity, finding another way perhaps to bring the best and brightest and to bring innovation. Things like Startup Chile may be an alternative to just lowering your tax rates and giving away government income. I will close there and turn on to the next speaker, but I very much thank you for your time and look forward to talking to you throughout the day. Thank you.
This program was brought to you by Klingler Institute of Venture at Tel Aviv University.